a martyr for Christ, as Paul and Peter were martyred, Lord, so now I come." He blew some urgent bubbles, but no one beside his God was taking any notice, and so he slowly dragged himself out of the muddy duckweed to spit curses at my men, who were eagerly dragging the stones aside. Beneath the rock pile was a cover of wooden boards that lifted to reveal a stone cistern crammed with leather sacks, and in the sacks was gold. Thick gold coins, gold chains, gold statues, gold torques, gold brooches, gold bracelets, gold pins. The gold fetched here by hundreds of pilgrims seeking the blessing of the thorn that Arthur now insisted a monk count and weigh, so that a proper receipt could be issued to the monastery. He left my men to supervise the tally, while he led a damp and protesting Sansom across the compound to the Holy Thorn. "You must learn to grow thorn trees before you meddle in the affairs of kings, my lord bishop," Arthur said. "You are not restored to the king's chaplaincy, but will stay here and learn husbandry." "Mulch the next tree," I advised him. "Let the roots stay damp while it settles in. And don't transplant a tree in flower, Bishop. They don't like it. That's been the trouble with the last few thorns you planted here. You dug them out of the woods at the wrong time. Bring them across in winter and dig them a good hole with some dung and mulch, and you might get a real miracle." "Forgive them, Lord," Sansom said, dropping to his knees and gazing into the damp heavens. Arthur wanted to visit the Tor, though first he stood beside Norwenna's grave that had become a place of veneration for Christians. "She was an ill-used woman," he told me. "All women are," Nimue said. She had followed us to the grave that stood close beside the Holy Thorn. "No," Arthur insisted. "Maybe most people are, but not all women any more than all men. But this woman was, and we still have to avenge her." "You had your chance of vengeance once," Nimue accused him harshly, "and you let Gundlius live." "Because I hope for peace," Arthur said. "But next time he dies." "Your wife," Nimue said, "promised him to me." Arthur shuddered, knowing what cruelty lay behind Nimue's desire. But he nodded. "He is yours," he said. "I promise it." He turned and led the two of us through the pouring rain to the Tor's summit. Nimue and I were going home, Arthur to see Morgan. He embraced his sister in the hall. Morgan's gold mask shone dully in the stormy light, while round her neck she wore the bear claws set in gold that Arthur had brought her from Benwick so very long ago. She clung to him, desperate for affection, and I left them alone. Nimue, almost as though she had never been away from the Tor, ducked through the small door into Merlin's rebuilt chambers, while I ran through the rain to Godovan's hut. I found the old clerk sitting at his desk, but not working, for he was blinded with cataracts, though he said he could still make out light and dark. "And mostly it's dark now," he said sadly, then smiled. "I suppose you're too big to hit now, Derval." "You can try, Godovan," I said, "but it won't do you much good any more." "Did it ever?" He chuckled. "Merlin spoke of you when he was here last week. Not that he stayed long. He came, he talked with us, he left us another cat, as if we didn't have enough cats already, and then he left. He didn't even stay the night, he was in such a hurry." "Do you know where he went?" I asked. "He wouldn't say. But where do you think he went?" Godovan asked with a touch of his old asperity. "Chasing Nimue. At least I suppose that's what he's doing, though why he should chase that silly girl I don't know. He should take a slave." He paused and suddenly seemed on the edge of tears. "You know Sybil died," he went on. "Poor woman. She was murdered, Derval. Murdered. Had her throat slit. No one knows who did it. Some traveller, I assume. The world goes to the dogs, Derval. To the dogs." For a moment he seemed lost. Then he found the thread of his thoughts again. "Merlin should use a slave. Nothing wrong with a willing slave, and there are plenty in town who oblige for a small coin. I use the house down by Gwilithan's old workshop. There's a nice woman there, though these days we tend to talk more than we bump about the bed. I get old, Derval." "We don't look old. And Merlin isn't chasing Nimue. She's here." Thunder sounded again, and Godovan's hand found a small piece of iron that he stroked for protection against evil. "Nimue? Here?" he asked in amazement. "But we heard she was on the Isle." He touched the iron again. "She was," I said flatly, "but isn't now." "Nimue?" He said the name almost in disbelief. "Is she staying?" "No. We all go east today." "And leaving us alone?" he asked petulantly. "I miss Howl." "So do I." He sighed. "Time's changed, Derval. The tour isn't what it was. We're all old now, and there are no children left. I miss them. And poor Druiden has no one to chase. Pellinore rants to emptiness, while Morgan is bitter." "Wasn't she always?" I asked lightly. "She's lost her power," he explained. "Not her power to tell dreams or heal the sick, but the power she enjoyed when Merlin was here and Uther was on the throne. She resents that, Derval, just as she resents your Nimue." He paused, thinking. "She was especially angry when Guinevere sent for Nimue to fight Sansom about that church in Durnovaria. Morgan believes she should have been summoned, but we hear that the Lady Guinevere wants no one but the beautiful around her. And where does that leave Morgan?" He chuckled at the question. "But she's still a strong woman, Derval, and she has her brother's ambitions, so she won't be content to stay here listening to the dreams of peasants and grinding herbs to cure the milk fever. She's bored. So bored that she even plays throwboard with that wretched Bishop Sansom from the shrine. Why did they send him to Innisridren?" "Because they didn't want him in Durnovaria. Does he really come here to play games with Morgan?" Godovan nodded. "He says he needs intelligent company, and that she has the cleverest mind in Innisridren, and I dare say he's right. He preaches to her, of course, endless nonsense about a virgin whelping a god who gets nailed to a cross, but Morgan just lets it roll past her mask. At least I hope she does." He paused and sipped from a horn of mead, in which a wasp was struggling as it drowned. When he put the horn down, I fished the wasp out and squashed it on his desk. "Christianity gains converts, Derval," Godovan went on. "Even Gwilithan's wife, that nice woman Ralla, has converted, which probably means that Gwilithan and the 2 children will follow her. I don't mind, but why do they have to sing so much?" "You don't like singing?" I teased him. "No one loves a good song better than I," he said stoutly. "The battle song of Uther, or the slaughter chant of Tyrannus, and that's what I call a song, not this whining and moaning about being sinners in need of grace." He sighed and shook his head. "I hear you were in Innistribes," he asked. I told him the tale of the city's fall. It seemed an appropriate story as we sat there with the rain falling on the fields outside and a gloom lowering over all Dumnonia. When the tale was told, Godovan stared sightlessly through the door, saying nothing. I thought he might have fallen asleep, but when I rose from the stool he waved me down. "Are things as bad as Bishop Sansom claims?" he asked. "They're bad, my friend," I admitted. "Tell me." I told him how the Irish and the Cornish were raiding in the west, where Cadui still pretended to rule an independent kingdom. Tristan did his best to restrain his father's soldiers, but King Mark could not resist enriching his poor kingdom by stealing from a weakened Dumnonia. I told him how Ael's Saxons had broken the truce, but added that Gorfithid's army still posed the greatest threat. "He's assembled the men of Elmit, Powys, and Siluria," I told Godovan, "and once the harvest is gathered, he'll lead them all south." "And Ael doesn't fight against Gorfithid?" the old scribe asked. "Gorfithid has purchased peace from Ael." "And will Gorfithid win?" Godovan asked. I paused a long time. "No," I finally said. Not because it was the truth, but because I did not want this old friend to worry that his last glimpse of this life would be a flash of light as a warrior's sword swung towards his blinded eyes. "Arthur will fight them," I said, "and Arthur has yet to be beaten." "You'll fight them too?" "It's my job now, Godolphin." "You would have made a good clerk," he said sadly, "and it is an honourable and useful profession, even though no one makes us lords because of it." I thought he had not known of my honour, and I suddenly felt ashamed of being so proud of it. Godolphin groped for his mead and took another sip. "If you see Merlin," he said, "tell him to come back. The Tor is dead without him." "I'll tell him." "Goodbye, Lord Derval," Godolphin said, and I sensed he knew we would never meet again in this world. I tried to embrace the old man, but he waved me away for fear of betraying his emotions. Arthur was waiting at the sea gate, where he stared westward across the marshes that were being storm-swept by great pale waves of rain. "This will be bad for the harvest," he said bleakly. Lightning flickered above the Severn Sea. "There was a storm like this after Uther died," I said. Arthur pulled his cloak tight around his body. "If Uther's son had lived," he said, then fell silent rather than finish the thought. His mood was as dark and bleak as the weather. "Uther's son could not have fought Gorfythid, Lord," I said, "nor Aiel." "Nor Cadui," he added bitterly, "nor Cerdic, so many enemies, Derval." "Then be glad you have friends, Lord." He acknowledged that truth with a smile, then turned to gaze northwards. "I worry about one friend," he said softly. "I worry that Tudric won't fight. He's tired of war, and I can't blame him for that. Gwent has suffered much worse than Dumnonia." He looked at me, and there were tears in his eyes. Or maybe it was just the rain. "I wanted to do such great things, Derval," he said. "Such great things. And in the end it was I who betrayed them, wasn't it?" "No, Lord," I said firmly. "A friend should speak the truth," he chided me gently. "You needed Guinevere," I said, embarrassed to be speaking thus, "and you were meant to be with her. Else why would the gods have brought her to the feasting hall on the night of your betrothal? It isn't for us, Lord, to read the minds of gods, just to live our fate fully." He grimaced at that, for he liked to believe he was master of his own fate. "You think we should all rush madly down the paths of destiny?" "I think, Lord, that when fate grips you, you do well to put reason aside." "And I did," he said quietly, then smiled at me. "Do you love someone, Derval?" he asked. "The only women I love, Lord, are not for me," I answered in self-pity. He frowned, then shook his head in commiseration. "Poor Derval," he said softly, and something about his tone made me look at him. Could he believe I had meant to include Guinevere among those women? I blushed and wondered what I should say, but Arthur had already turned to watch as Nimue came from the hall. "You must tell me about the Isle of the Dead sometime," he said, "when we have the time." "I shall tell you, Lord, after your victory," I said, "when you need good tales to fill long winter evenings." "Yes," he said, "after our victory." Though he did not sound hopeful. Gorfythid's army was so huge, and ours so small. But before we could fight Gorfythid, we had to buy a Saxon's peace with God's money. And so we travelled towards Llogir. We smelt Durocabrivis long before we came near the town,